Family law. This is your guide for week number 9. And if you remember before spring break, we talked about divorce. You completed your divorce petition, and we said we were going to move into child custody and then child support. This is your child custody week. We'll be focusing on child custody. Your pre-class assignment is to read the Illinois Parenting Responsibility Statute. And if you haven't done that, go do that. That's also to read the resources linked to the assignment form for the Illinois Legal Aid Online parenting plan. So read both of those. If you haven't done that before listening or watching this, then stop, do that, and come back. After you've done that, we're going to break down a little bit child custody. And it's important. You can read the statute, and that's good that you have read the statute. And it's good that you know what Illinois expects at this time. But we're going to look at some things. We're going to define the parent-child relationship. We'll talk a little bit about best interest of the child, the legal and physical components of child custody, define joint custody and sole custody, and then we'll review Illinois law. Or actually, you're going to review Illinois law and provide your paralegal analysis for me. There's 4 fundamental principles traditionally of the parent-child relationship. All right, so parenthood is achieved solely through either biology, the biological parent of a child, or adoption, where a court orders that another person is the parent. And adoptive parents in Illinois have these same rights and expectations as biological parent. Parents have a fundamental right to direct the upbringing of their children, including who has access to those children. And that's just one of the expectations. A child can only have one recognized mother and one recognized father. That's number 3. And if there's a dispute as to custody or control of a child, there's an automatic preference in favor of a parent. So parents would be favored, and there's an automatic preference towards that. Now, that comes into play in a lot of different things that we may have already discussed a little bit, and especially when we talked about abuse and neglect, but it's just one of the expectations. Those are one of the 4 principles for the parent-child relationship. Now, when we're dealing with best interest of a child, there's typically 3 to 4 elements that we look at. And in a custody case, typically these include the physical health of a child, the mental health of a child, the emotional health of the child, and where relevant or connected to those other elements, we may see the moral health of a child be brought up, but the moral health of a child sometimes falls within mental and emotional, and it's a little more difficult to quantify. But those are typically the ones you will see. Now, how are those first 3 distinguishable, and why would I say that it's more difficult to quantify moral? Physical health, I can see physical manifestations. I can have medical experts, testify about a physical condition of a child that may be related to their circumstances, to their health and well-being, to the circumstances of which they're being raised, or the circumstances of the environment in which they're being raised. The same can be said for mental and emotional. I can find qualified experts, qualified people who are able to look at the circumstances and give me some sort of basis for an opinion that a child's mental or emotional health has been affected by circumstances the child has been exposed to, or the circumstances of the surroundings where the child lives, or the circumstances in which they live. Now, many times, and a lot of times, the mental and emotional health of anyone has physical manifestations. Think about that for a minute. Now, we know that some of you in the class have faced divorce yourself. Many of you have faced divorce in your immediate family. Many of you may have been children who were part of some of those things. We've talked about the number of us who have been exposed to physical, mental, or emotional abuse or neglect. If you think about yourself when you're mentally or emotionally affected, are there physical manifestations? Sure. Loss of appetite, lack of sleep, um, you know, being worn down, being mentally or emotionally worn down has a physical manifestation. Bags under your eyes, losing weight, gaining weight, all those different things. So typically there are physical manifestations. Typically, if there are physical issues or issues that are related to someone's physical well-being, there are also mental and emotional. So those all kind of go together, and they're easier to quantify, as I said, as opposed to moral, which may, what's one person thinks is moral, another person may not. And then we get into the whole religion ball of wax and all the different arguments there. So a little more difficult. That's how those first three are distinguishable. Now, some factors that traditionally have been used by courts and by statutes in determining the best interest of a child: the parent-child bond. What is the bond between the parent and the child? Do they have a clear connection? The ability or availability of time one parent may have to be with the child. Past caretaking. Who fed the kid, bathed the kid, clothed the kid, made sure the kid got proper sleep, picked the kid up from school, helped the kid with homework. Who did that? Who is the past caretaker? The stability of the environment of the parent goes into best interest. Where are they living? Who else is living there? How safe is it? How much space is there? Does the child have a place of their own to sleep, a safe place of their own to sleep? Depending on age, the preference of the child. What does the child prefer? That's not always relevant. And sometimes kids in divorce situations will play both ends against the middle. So it's a difficult position for the court to be in, but depending on the age, the court may listen to the preference of the child. Were there any past domestic abuse or neglect concerns? And we talked about that when we talked about that area of the class, or that portion of the class. And then the physical and mental health of the parent. Many of you in the class have younger kids right now. You have to be physically and mentally there, right? You have to be physically and mentally able to care for your children. That's a requirement, right? That's something that we have to be concerned with. Some other considerations that may be raised but aren't necessarily factors in custody determinations today: a religion of a party, sexual orientation. Those are two. Historically, items that were considerations, but for a few decades or less ago, they're not things that come up, or they're no longer regularly heard or considered by the court, unless those considerations impact one of the factors we just discussed. So, I had a case I took for Prairie State Legal Services at one point, and the father was seeking additional time with his child. The mother was remarried and objecting, The father was practicing a religion that sometimes raises some eyebrows, is a little out of the norm. But the father was otherwise, hardworking, paying child support, doing the best he could. And he was living in a place where he could have his child safely. But there was a great difference between the religion experiences of the child who was going to a parochial religion-based school and the religion that the father was practicing. And so we had to flesh all that out with the courts. Ultimately, the judge decided, as a judge should have, that it didn't have a good enough reason based on that argument that the father should not be allowed sufficient time with his child. So, and then the sexual orientation, unless there's some other issue, it's, that ship has left the dock. Physical and legal custody distinguished. There's physical custody, and you've looked at the statute, and so you can see that the Illinois statute sort of bears this out. They don't use these terms, but you can see where this is going. Physical custody refers to where a child lives. Legal custody refers to the decision-making authority a parent may have over the child. And clearly, Illinois still looks to these two things as being separate expectations for both the parent and the children. Now, that's different than sole and joint custody. Now, we used to, and again, we've moved away from these terms, but you'll also see this, and you'll see that you can't completely get away from it. So sole custody referred to custodial rights in one parent. Either the legal or physical custody could be sole. One person could have sole custody in that area. Joint custody referred to sharing the rights and responsibilities. Both legal and physical custody were allocated on a joint basis. The reality for a lot of those situations was that the physical custody was more with, if not solely with, one person. So depending on whatever the circumstance. And now there were, or we did have an evolution where you saw more people that shared the physical custody in a near equal way. My own circumstance, the minors in my divorce, they were with me an equal amount of time as they were with their mother. And the way we did that was they were with me 2 days a week, with her 2 days a week, and we rotated weekends. So Friday, Saturday, Sunday, we rotated. I had them on Monday, Tuesday. So if they were with me for a weekend, they were with me for 5 days straight. And then she had Wednesday, Thursday. So if they were with her for a weekend, they were with her Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. We lived close, within blocks. It was doable. My work allowed me to be just as active. Her work allowed her to be just as active. They went to the same schools. Nothing really changed in that regard. They did have to haul stuff back and forth, and that was difficult. But what precludes a lot of opportunities to do that, or did in the past and still does, is that people aren't always able to work and live and stay within that close of a distance. And so one parent may live in a different school boundary, which means that the school bus that picks the child up from one house won't be picking the child up from another house. So that you have those kind of things to think of. But we don't see those words being used. As you flesh out the statute, you see a little bit of the history there. Now, some common divorce disputes. So during the divorce, disputes over custody, full or joint, and that sometimes a desire versus reality. And based on what I just talked about, the court has to consider the best interest of the child. And sometimes the practicalities mean that someone is going to have more physical custody than the other person. And that's just the circumstance. And it depends on a lot of different things, but typically the age of the child in school and a lot of other things. And as your kids get older, your kids are more involved in certain things. It's a lot more difficult to sort of juggle all of that, as opposed to when kids are younger and not yet in school or doing those kind of things. Um, some of the others are those relocation disputes where someone wants to move to somewhere else, and that somewhere else creates a hardship on the other parent from being a part of the child's life. That's always an issue. Um, and so that's something that might come up during the divorce. Some common post-divorce disputes in the custody realm: disputes about custody, changes in custody, disputes about time with the children. Um, and those things can change based on, circumstances that change with the child as they get older and have more things that pull them away and would have pulled them away from the parents in the first place, right? I mean, your kids living with you. As they get older, they get into the teenage years, and those of you who have teenagers know that at some point, it's like you hardly see them. They especially when they get involved in activities at school and jobs and things, and the friends, and they get a car and they're mobile. They start to fade from their normal expectation, or your normal expectation of when they're going to be around. But those same things, circumstances change with the kid, but also with the parent. One of the parents gets a different job. They enter into a different relationship where they get married again and they move, because that's what happens. There can be all kinds of things there. And relocation, people get moved for jobs, people get moved for opportunities, people get relocated because that's the only choice they have. So those things can all come up just as easily post-divorce as they do pre-divorce. Now, Illinois law, as you know, is contained in 755 ILCS 5/601. And your pre-class job was to go to the statute and break it down with supporting case law as to how it may apply to your assigned divorce client. So in other words, the person that you represented, or you drafted the draft of the divorce petition for before the break. And that's what I needed to do. You need to go and look at the statute, break it down with case law support as to how the statute might apply to the circumstance of your client in your divorce petition. If you need to contact each other for additional information, feel free to do that, but that's what your assignment is, and it's spelled out on the assignment page. Come to class as a paralegal with any questions on any of this, and we'll talk about it. And then after we do that, we'll see where we go. And then we'll wrap up custody before we head to child support for 2 weeks. And as I pointed out, and I've been pointing out, if you have me for other classes, the rest of this semester flies. It goes downhill really quick. It's just a flying opportunity to get lost if you don't schedule the time, put in the time, and especially as the weather warms up and the sun comes back, and you don't want to be sitting in the house. So keep that energy and keep that focus. These are all important things, especially the second half of this semester and the next few weeks. The things you're going to deal with, if not in practice, maybe in life. So pay attention. I'll be around if you need me. I appreciate you. Stay well.